subscribe and press the bell icon.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Strength Mobcast. Today we have on our podcast a very new guest, and his name is Bryce Lewis. He's a world champion, and he has been the USAPL champion for 3 times in the 105 kg category. And he's the co-founder of Strength Athlete and an online coach and a world-renowned athlete. So we have him today on our podcast. And Bryce, how are you doing right now?
I'm doing great. It's morning here, and I just had some coffee, and I'm excited to be talking to you guys.
Yeah, so as I was saying, Bryce, can you tell more about yourself to the people?
Yeah, I'm a powerlifting coach for raw drug-free lifters. We work with a few people who compete equipped, but for the most part, we coach raw lifters. Um, I now work with three other coaches, Hanny, Eric, and Joe, and together we form a company called the Strength Athlete, and we help powerlifters get better. Gain more strength, learn to appreciate lifting in better ways, understand nutrition. We talk education, we talk technique, and every facet of lifting that might help someone get better. And that's kind of our mission statement is, how can we kind of improve this community here? So we started that, let's see, it's 2020. We started that 7 years ago. And since then, it's been awesome to kind of help athletes get better and grow as a company and continue to refine our own set of skills. Outside of the company, I'm also a powerlifter as well in the 105 kilo class, like you mentioned. I was supposed to be getting ready for Worlds this year, which was supposed to be last week, actually. But Team USA decided not to send a team, and the actual event itself got moved to later this year. So no world level competition for me this year, and potentially no national level competition. We'll see. COVID cases are kind of back on a rise in Florida, where Raw Nationals was supposed to be held, and so we'll just kind of have to see in a few months what the situation is like. But still training just as hard, and I'll compete at some point. We'll just see when that happens to be. And outside of that, my interests for education, kind of ongoing education, these days revolve around the mind. So things around sports psychology, around motivation, anxiety, performance, and different ways of attacking some of those aspects that can prevent people from being their best selves. Burnout has been one, mental toughness has been one. So just different ways to help people continue to get better in more ways than just strength training.
Yeah, and can you tell us more about your bodybuilding history?
Yeah. I started bodybuilding before powerlifting. So about 10 years ago, I was 74 kilos or 73 kilos or something like that. So I've put on quite a bit over this period. But that was the leanest that I got down to. I was, 5% body fat or something like that. And competing in natural bodybuilding for a few years, I feel like I learned a lot about myself through the process of natural bodybuilding, about dedication, about, discipline that's more than just, going to the gym 4 days a week. It's discipline about, measuring your food exactly, and having the right number of meals, and just being objective with data and tracking your body weight and all those kind of things that we need to do to be good bodybuilders. And it allowed me to be a better coach too. So I never really was anything special in bodybuilding, but I do feel like I learned a lot about myself, and I did get pretty lean, so that felt good. And you like the way you look, but you hate the way you feel. So it's take one or
Yeah.
the other.
Very true,
So
Bryce.
how has the transition from bodybuilding to powerlifting has been for you?
It's been nothing short of amazing. So I was doing bodybuilding, and then I started doing a powerlifting competition in my off season from bodybuilding, thinking I'll try this powerlifting thing, and then I'll go back to bodybuilding. And as soon as I tried powerlifting, I was decently successful at it early on. And you don't have to track your calories as closely. You have full, I don't know, six to 10 kilo window that you can be in and still be in the same weight class. And I was having fun. You still get to train hard, and it gave me some new things to focus on. And in bodybuilding, you care about the numbers that you're lifting somewhat, but in powerlifting, you care about the numbers that you're lifting a lot. So I was really attracted to how measurable powerlifting was and how quantified it is, and how you can kind of understand a system underneath that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, I transitioned to powerlifting and kind of never looked back. It's been powerlifting for 10 years or so, and I still continue to enjoy it and find new things to get interested in.
Yeah, so raw powerlifting has always been a big thing in the US, or is it like a current thing?
It's definitely growing. So just to give a little bit of a history from the IPF perspective, I think the first world level raw competition was only in 2010, maybe. It was a classic cup invitational thing, and world level raw powerlifting is pretty new. It's, powerlifting's history is equipped ever since the 70s. If you wanted to compete in powerlifting, you compete single ply, and that's kind of the background of powerlifting, and raw powerlifting is pretty new. I will say in the United States, the increase in raw powerlifting seems to kind of go tandem with the increase in CrossFit as well. So athletes are getting into CrossFit on the one side, discovering barbells and squats and how fun all that stuff is. And then some fraction of those people discover, oh, I can just do this barbell stuff and not have to do handstand push-ups or whatever. And so they switch over to powerlifting. And the two have kind of continued to grow together for quite a while. And we'll see kind of how that goes for the next 5 years. But that's been a little bit of the history of raw powerlifting.
And I think people are very attracted towards the CrossFit type of physique as well, because I've heard most people say that I want a CrossFitter type of physique as compared to a powerlifter type of physique.
Yeah. Very few people take a look at an elite level powerlifter and think, I want to look like that. And that's not to say that we're all fat slobs. You know what I mean? Like it just really depends on the weight class and who you're talking about. That said, there's a certain type of aesthetic for both bodybuilding and for CrossFit. Your shirt's off, you're sweating, you're outside, you got shredded abs, the crowd's cheering for you. That's a really attractive image for a lot of people, and I totally understand it. There's social norms around, being lean and ripped, and people want attraction from women, and women want attraction from men, and I understand it.
So do you think CrossFit could be a more dangerous sport than powerlifting?
That's a good question. I think the perception that CrossFit is more dangerous than powerlifting is really overblown for a few reasons. Number one, I think what you see on YouTube with those fail compilations and stuff like that, that's a hand-selected group of the times where people messed up. You know what I mean? And of course, we're going to see the worst of the worst when all you're doing is looking for the worst of the worst. But when we compare actual injury rates, we see a few things. We see the fact that both powerlifting and CrossFit are very safe. And the fact is that most people who do CrossFit aren't training for the games, where they're training, 3-hour sessions, 7 days a week, and training all these skills and training in high levels of fatigue. They're training more like normal gym people. They go to a class 3 times a week. That's an hour long. They've got instructors that, even if the instructors aren't very competent, they're still doing relatively safe movements and relatively safe amounts. So the perception that CrossFit is very dangerous is probably well overblown. And I think another key difference here is the types of injuries you see from CrossFit athletes and the types of injuries you see from powerlifting are different. So in CrossFit, you might see more acute things. Someone drops a barbell, someone, hits their shin on a box or something like that. In powerlifting, the types of injuries you see are more chronic. It's more like an achy shoulder that just stays with you for a year, or it's a low back that just is constantly hurting or something. So the chronic things, they're not as glamorous, and they're still just as dangerous, and they hurt just as much, but it's just a little bit different. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And do you think CrossFit is more famous than powerlifting there, because you could see, the different events that are hosted every year? Because Sheffield was going to happen this year, but it also got delayed. towards next year?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say CrossFit is far more popular in the United States than powerlifting is, both in terms of the number of people who do it. If you go into a coffee shop and you shout CrossFit, the number of people who understand what you're saying are well more than if you shout powerlifting. I haven't done that test, but I'll report back to you guys when I go shout that in a coffee shop. But yeah, it's certainly more, and big sponsors like Reebok kind of help with that, and putting on these large competitions and having really good media teams, and it's this whole package. But yeah, certainly CrossFit is more popular.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, that for a big time, equi powerlifting has been the face of powerlifting, and I think similar has been for India as well, because in our mentality that whatever happens in US after 20 years it comes to India. So yeah, so for until I think until 2015, equi powerlifting was very in the flow, and since then from the last 3 4 years, 5 years, raw powerlifting has been growing, and we are trying to get it to the next level as well.
Yeah. Well, that should give you guys an advantage because you kind of get to see history play out in the United States first and then learn what happened here and then
Yeah,
apply it in India.
yeah, that's a good marker. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Aniket, do you want to take it from here?
So, Bryce, I had some questions for you. So, why powerlifters hate CrossFit so much?
It's really just a meme at this point. It's kind of like,
Yeah,
oh, my friends hate CrossFit, so I should hate CrossFit too. Um, there's not a whole lot to hate when you look at it closely. It's people training hard, it's people enjoying themselves. It's classes, it's team sessions, that kind of thing is really cool. I think there's a few things that people latch onto, powerlifters especially, and these are the points of contention. So let me run you through a few of them. I think kipping pull-ups is one of them. So if you show a powerlifter a kipping pull-up, they think, oh, well, this isn't a pull-up. This isn't actually doing anything. But let's take that same example and let's think about the sumo deadlift. So
yeah,
the rules of CrossFit say, all right, you just have to touch your chest to the bar, right? And that's the rule. And so some CrossFitters have come up with a way to kind of cheat the system and do this swinging motion that gets them more reps in a shorter period of time. Great. Sumo deadlifting is the same thing basically. So the rules of powerlifting say you just have to stand up with the bar, and you can't hitch and stuff like that. And so some powerlifters realize, well, if I put my feet outside and if I put my hands inside, then I get to pull more weight. And all it is kind of a way to cheat the system. So I look at these two things as solutions to a particular problem. And so there's a lot more similarity than I think there are differences in some of these. So that's one of them. And I'm sure the other one is just really bad technique on things like deadlift. And all of this kind of comes from those fail videos and stuff like that. So if you see enough of those, you start to form a negative opinion and think, oh, well, this must be all of CrossFit, or this is how everyone does it. So I would say that's where it comes from.
so from the sumo deadlift point, but what do you have to say the war between the sumo deadlift versus conventional deadlift?
I'd say the rules say that you just need to stand up with a barbell, and so you can do either stance. So the people who think sumo is cheating don't know powerlifting. They don't know what it means to do a deadlift. A deadlift means you have to stand up with a barbell, and it doesn't have anything to do with how wide your stance is. Same thing with squat, or same thing with bench press. We don't get mad at people for having a wider grip on their hands. The arch is a different story for the bench press, but yeah, certainly we don't get mad at people for like having a wider squat stance or something like that, or saying being short is cheating just because it's easier. So yeah, I mean, I think those types of things are overblown. Sumo's cheating is really not something I worry about.
Actually, in my opinion, people with less mobility have difficulty in sumo deadlifts.
Yeah, certainly. You have to get your femur kind of pretty far out in your hip socket, and that can be uncomfortable for quite a while. The conventional deadlift is a little easier for mobility concerns.
Yeah,
Uh,
same goes
I,
for me. It's very difficult for me to do sumo deadlift. I
Hmm.
can't get my femur as like this far. it's very
Yeah.
difficult. So I stick with conventional.
Nice. Yeah. Again, it's really just kind of about finding the right position for you. It's not saying, oh, well, everyone should be doing sumo deadlifts or something like that, or max grip width on bench press.
I think as you talked about the femur, I think it's very prevalent your anatomy because how far your femur can be rotated into your hip socket determines your stance as well. So
Yeah, that's very true. And I think one of the things that you hopefully learn early on in powerlifting is, when you look at people who have what you think as perfect technique, that might be something to shoot for, but we always have to remember your individual anatomy is what matters most. So it doesn't matter what, your favorite famous lifter over here is doing with their technique. If you don't have the hip mobility or your hip shape is just a little bit different and it just doesn't feel good when you try it. So we've got to bring it down and find out what works best for you specifically.
yeah, but I think if a person, or else if an athlete is comfortable doing sumo, but his competition deadlift is a conventional, he can still benefit from doing sumo in the off season to some extent.
Yeah, you might be right. I would say typically for the athletes we work with that if they're a sumo deadlifter, we sometimes have them do conventional deadlift. But if they are a conventional deadlifter, we rarely have them do sumo just because it's so much more of a technical movement. But it's still a deadlift. You're still training your muscles just as well in a slightly different movement pattern. So there's very few tools in the tool chest that I take completely off the table.
So similar to sumo deadlift, do you think overhead press could have an carryover to bench press?
Somewhat. So my opinion on that is I think there's probably some low threshold that you have to get your shoulder strength to. So, let's pretend someone has 140 kilo pound or 140 kilo bench press, but their overhead press is 50 kilos. That's probably too low. So if that's the case for a certain lifter, it might be the case that their shoulder strength is a bottleneck that you can't get past for increased bench press. So in that case, training direct shoulder work a lot is probably going to help their bench press a lot too. So maybe getting their overhead press up to 100 kilos, and now all of a sudden their bench press progress is really going to take off because they have more muscle to work with. So the way that I think about muscle strength specifically when it comes to things like this is really more in the sense of kind of potentiating future progress. So the number that you can hit for an overhead press is really just it's a correlate of saying this is roughly the size of your muscles. You know what I mean? So all we're saying is we need your shoulders to be a certain level of overall hypertrophy. You've grown, that they're proportionate with your chest and your triceps in order to continue to get stronger. So I think that's all we're trying to say here. So bringing it back and kind of making it more concrete, training your shoulders all the time is probably good, but I think if you want to get better at bench pressing, you probably need to do more bench pressing, and that's the main way that we drive that movement.
But do you think, irrelative of their shoulder strength and when compared to your bench strength, do you think the different range of motion could be a thing that doesn't have a great carryover?
Yeah. So it's a different range of motion entirely. It's a different plane too. We're going in the vertical plane rather than the horizontal plane. So, again, you might have an athlete train the overhead press once a week, but have them train their bench press 3 times a week or something like that. So the carryover, if someone put 10 kilos on their overhead press, which is a lot, I would not expect them to put 10 kilos on their bench press as a result.
Yeah. So can we now talk about your coaching?
Yeah, please.
Aniket, do you have any questions or should I?
You go ahead, bro.
Okay, so what is the training philosophy that you guys use when coaching your clients or your athletes?
Good question. Do you want to talk about training philosophy when it comes to programming, or training philosophy for like communication, or kind of which piece of coaching philosophy are we talking
Mostly
about?
programming.
For programming?
Yeah.
So let's pretend we kind of have 4 dials here on our coaching dashboard for volume, intensity, frequency, and exercise selection. So depending on what setting you put these 4 knobs to, you can come up with most training styles we can think of. We can create Bulgarian method, we can create DUP, we can create any one of a number of different training approaches that you see out in the wild. I would say that our dials are set to moderate high volume, moderate frequency, moderate to low intensity, I'd say, relative intensity, and then high specificity for exercise selection. So lots of competition, squatting, benching, and deadlifting. And if we use variations there, things like pauses or partial range of motion or changes in tempo or something like that. And then athletes are so we try very hard to make sure training is sustainable, that athletes aren't getting buried in fatigue on a regular basis, and we keep our ear to the ground for things like injuries and stuff. So that's why a lot of the other dials are set to just moderate. So you can expect to train the squat somewhere between 2 to 4 times a week, train the bench somewhere between 2 to 4 times a week, and the deadlift once to twice, and then a healthy amount of bodybuilding work after that to help with long-term progression as well.
So do you guys, do your programming in terms of phases or blocks?
I would say we use blocks very loosely. So over the course of somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks, you'll see a progression of increasing weight, and you'll see a group of very similar exercises. And we use that as kind of a unit to see how progress was and to kind of test an idea. So we say, okay, this week of training with this amount of sets and reps and this amount of overall volume, this is the thing that we're testing. Is this making progress for the athlete? Yes or no? Is it making progress for their squat but not their bench press? And so at the end of somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks, we review and we ask ourselves what's working, what's not working. And maybe at the end of that period, the athlete has built up a lot of fatigue because we're going heavy by the end of this. And then we reset in some way and we repeat that process. So how long the mesocycle is, just a convenient name for that unit of time, how long that is depends on how hard the athlete was training, how much progress they were making, and some genetic factors about their ability to recover, some things about their experience level. These things kind of change over time, but you get to notice that an athlete needs 4 weeks before they need a deload, or another athlete needs 5 weeks before they need a deload. And if you pay attention close enough, you can kind of figure out some trends in that over time.
So throughout the course of weeks, do you only make changes in the volume or with weights as well?
With weights, absolutely. With volume, sometimes too, but usually not in terms of number of sets. So the number of sets will stay relatively constant over a mesocycle. Let's pretend that we're looking at day 1 for an athlete's training approach, and we're looking at their squats, and they're doing 4 sets or something. So we might start off with sets of 7, and then we might go to sets of 6 and do kind of a linear drop across weeks. So they're doing less reps, and we can give them higher RPEs and maybe see more load on the bar, or we can keep the 4 sets of 6 and just add, a few percent each week or something like that. But I would say the number of sets is relatively constant across weeks. The caveat being if we're peaking or something like that. So we'll also see very similar exercise selection across those weeks.
And how much time would you think it takes you to determine the right amount of frequency for each lift for an athlete?
Good question. So we choose frequency for an athlete based on a few factors. So you come to us as a new athlete, and we'll ask you some questions like, what were you doing before you started working with us? Looking back on your past as an athlete, where did you find your best success? So when were you making the most progress? What's your level of experience? What are your 1 rep maxes? How long have you been training for? And so using these questions, we can ask and find out, are you a beginner? Are you an intermediate? Are you an advanced? Are you a very lightweight athlete that needs more frequency? Are you a heavyweight athlete that can only train the squat or the deadlift once a week? So we want to start off somewhere reasonable, somewhere that's not extreme. And then as we work with an athlete for a longer period of time, we can ask ourselves questions to kind of refine things. Or, oh, it looks like your bench press isn't progressing well, even though your squat and your deadlift are. Maybe let's try adding an extra day of some bench work to see if we can give you a little bit more volume. So frequency is important, but frequency is a vehicle for volume. So, if we have, let's say, 10 sets, I could have the athlete doing 5 sets on one day and 5 sets on another day. But that's a lot of work. I might also divide that up into 3, 3, and 4 instead, which are a little bit more manageable sessions. So the important thing here is the overall amount of volume, not necessarily how you split it up.
Okay. So talking about volume, don't you think the phase of hypertrophy or the block of hypertrophy deals with more of volume and strength deals with more of intensity? So how do we equate that?
Good question. So if you want an athlete to train in a higher overall amount of volume, then you would just keep the reps a little bit higher, keep the RPEs somewhere in the 6 to 8 RPE range, and maybe give them an extra few sets, and you're covered. So if we talk about intensifying training, I'm putting up quotation marks here for the people listening. All that means is you drop the reps down a little bit so the athlete can put more weight on the bar. So somewhere between 5 and less reps, the athlete can start to handle 80% or more on the bar, and now we're getting them to train strength and not just hypertrophy. So as powerlifters, ultimately what we care about is getting better at singles, because that's what we do in competition. So at some point we need to work our way down and start training singles, so we can have the athlete training in higher intensities. The one thing that I want to remind you is that we don't necessarily have to have only hypertrophy phases and only intensity phases. So you can have a hypertrophy block where you have the athlete do a single before some sets of 8, or you can have an intensity block where on one day they're doing their heavy 3s, and another day they're still doing 8s, earlier in the week or something like that. So we can blend these approaches over time.
More like a DUP approach?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and how do you go about tracking recovery and other performance?
I really I ask a lot of questions, and I think I found that any recovery metric that I try to do doesn't really give me as much information as saying, hey, do you feel sore right now? And just basic questions about how sore or fresh someone is can go a long way. So it's one thing to have someone track data, and in our training files we have this 5-point metric. So you just answer on a 1 to 5 scale these 5 easy questions. It's something like your tiredness, your soreness, your readiness, and kind of a few other things. And you just rate a 1 to 5 on each of those. And so we can kind of see a trend in that over time. But athletes usually know when they need to deload. Coach, I'm feeling very banged up. I don't think I'll be able to add weight next week. Or, Coach, I'm feeling really fresh. Let's keep this block going a little bit longer. So just casual conversation can do a lot. And I think that also gives you an opportunity to get to know your athlete better.
Yeah. And what about exercise selection? Like, do you switch exercises, the main lifts or accessory lifts every 3 to 6 weeks, or how do you go about it?
I'd say that exercises are highly dependent on athletes' training response. So let's pretend that we have an athlete doing safety bar squat on one day and competition low bar squat on another day. And that formula, for whatever reason, is working really well for an athlete. They're making progress, their safety bar squat's going up, so is their main lift, and all that stuff is going up. I wouldn't want to change that. Because the whole reason that we choose sets, that we choose reps, that we choose exercises is to get an increase in strength. So if you find that, then you just want to kind of keep things going for as long as possible in the right direction, even if you're close to a competition. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are the things that we care about headed in the right direction? And if they're not, then we can start to play around with different exercises or something like that. So the reasons that we might choose different exercises are varied. Sometimes we choose a different exercise because I want you to learn how to pause effectively on your chest. So I'm giving you a 3-count pause bench, or I want you to learn something about how to deadlift. So I'm giving you deadlift with chains so that you can kind of accelerate through the second half of the lift. So This is the case of exercises being used to teach something about technique, which I think is an important use for exercises. The second way is to get around some ache or pain. So going back to that safety bar squatter, sometimes their low bar position just hurts their shoulders. So maybe for this kind of athlete, 1 day a week, we can just get them to do safety bar squats where their hands are in a much more neutral position. So this allows them to train more sustainably for a much longer period of time. And that's a really good use for exercise selection. And the other way is just because it helps your competition lift. So maybe we find out for some athletes, I have this lifter who really likes half board bench press. She feels like her half board bench press really makes her competition bench press go up. So we keep half board bench press in because she feels like this really helps her competition lift. So that's another reason.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty, it's a good thing that athletes know what works for them as compared to, coaches giving them like do this exercise or else do this accessory movement.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. But it takes a certain level of experience in an athlete to be even able to come up with that, And I guess the second question we have is always compared to the competition lift. So, yes, this pause squat might be working for you, but is it working for you more than competition squatting would be working for you? So I guess that's the comparison that we always have to make. But yeah, I love working with athletes who are very in tune with themselves and get to know, oh, well, I really enjoyed when we had dumbbell bench press in there. I feel like that was really good for my shoulders or things like that. That piece of athlete feedback is really, really important.
So how do you go about assessing a weakness in the range of motion or weakness of, a muscle, particularly in the SBD? Like, do you look at their max attempts or how do you go about it?
Yeah, it's really tough. It's tough for a few reasons. So one reason it's tough is that just might be how they're built. So take a high level lifter. Um, Take someone who deadlifts 330 kilos or something like that, okay? And they have what you might look at and say bad technique. So they're deadlifting and their knees come in and their back starts around a little bit, but they're deadlifting 330 kilos. So that person says, I want to work with Vedant. And when you start with him, are you going to change his technique or are you going to, look at other things? So it's a real question, and I've worked with some high level athletes who come to us and I kind of want to play around with technique, but I kind of don't want to mess up a formula that they have. So part of the issue with technique is dependent on body structure and on this entire history this athlete has had of sport up to that point. So maybe they learned one specific way and unlearning would actually make them weaker. So we don't want that either. So we have to ask ourselves, is it worth it to change? So that's one piece of figuring out weak spots. Another point of figuring out weak spots is by nature of the way that we squat, we bench, and we deadlift, most raw powerlifters are going to be weak about 2 to 4 inches off the chest. They're going to be weak right out of the hole on squat, and they're going to be weak either off the floor for sumo deadlifting or close to lockout for conventional deadlifting. And if you find that, it's not a bad thing or something to target because that's the way that all powerlifters are weak. And so you could give them, extra work right around their weak point, 2-board bench or pause bench or something like that. But you could also just get them stronger, and that would also give them the same weak point but at a heavier weight. So it's complex for sure. And I think that weak points are sometimes worth looking at and a lot of times not worth looking at.
Yeah. So do you think there are some, accessory movements which could be beneficial for every person or every athlete?
Yeah, I would say most athletes we work with get some kind of direct quad work, direct chest work, direct tricep work, and then occasionally some athletes also get direct glute work, direct shoulder work, and I would say that's kind of the core of what athletes are getting. From there, sometimes athletes get extra ab work, extra biceps, hamstrings, stuff like that. But almost all of our athletes also have extra quad work in the form of leg press, leg extension, belt squat, hack squat, something like that, lunges. And they also get some extra chest work that's either dumbbell bench or machine chest press or push-ups or something like that too.
And is it the same in the context of close variations on the SBD, or it could be different for everyone?
Could be different for everyone. So some people just get competition squat, bench, and deadlift. Some people get variations, and we talked already about why someone might get a specific exercise variation.
Yeah.
But
So
I have a question over here.
Yeah.
So, don't you think we are training for a particular competition squat? Then why should we train a pause squat?
Yeah, it's a
Just
good
example.
question. The question of specificity is basically what you're saying. So
Yeah.
if we ultimately want to be good at the squat, why should we do anything else besides the squat? So one reason is some of those things about exercise selection. Maybe someone's knees fold in at the bottom of the squat, and we think that giving them pause squats will fix that. So we want to get them to fix that. Another thing is that the pause squat puts less weight on the bar, usually somewhere between 5 to 10% less weight on the bar. So sometimes we just want less weight on the bar. So this is called a self-limited exercise, and it's just a way to get a decrease in stress for the athlete. And sometimes variations actually do more for us than the main lift, So if you guys know the repeated bout effect, it's the idea that doing a movement for long enough decreases the growth signal that we're getting from that movement. So, your very first time of doing bicep curls, your body's screaming, "Whoa, what the hell is this? I need more biceps on my biceps." And then, the fifth time that happens, it's like, oh, I know this exercise. We're just going to add a little bit of muscle here. So new exercises, even if they're subtle differences from the main lift, have a larger increase in hypertrophy, and they might have an increase in strength as well. Other reasons we might use exercise variation are to prevent burnout. So if you're working with an athlete and you're 9 years in with working with that athlete and you've only ever used squat, bench, and deadlift, I would be surprised if you got to that point and the athlete wasn't begging for a new exercise. You know what I mean? So we want training to be fun. We want to give them something new to play around with, something new to learn as well. So that's a real thing that we want athletes to worry about.
And I think adding close variations like pauses in the SBD could be, a better way to teach the athlete to be stronger and more stable or tighter in that particular range of motion. For example, in the bottom or at the beginning.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We might learn real things about our main lift, the thing that we care about, by doing other things. So the easiest way to think about this is, I came from a background of volleyball, and in volleyball, you learn a skill by breaking it down into parts and learning about each of those parts. So I don't know how much your listeners know about volleyball, but let's pretend someone gets a set and they go up for a swing. They're doing this 3-step approach. Their arms swing back. They jump up. They plant their feet. They're targeting the ball. They're up in the air, and they go to hit that. It's a very complex movement. I used to train athletes anywhere from age 12 to 18, so young kids kind of first learning this skill. And it would be absolutely dumb of me to say, all right, we're ready. All you do is you go up, you jump, and you hit the ball. You know what I mean? And expect it to be perfect. We have to break this skill down into smaller pieces for them to learn those pieces and then put those pieces together. And the same thing is true for squatting, benching, and deadlifting. So if we want someone to learn how to do this movement, there's something to learn by doing the whole movement, but there's also things to learn by pauses, different bars, using accommodating resistance, or all the other tools that you guys use with your own athletes.
So since you have flirted with the idea of previous training of sports before coming to powerlifting, can you talk about like what the effect of playing sports in your young age has on powerlifting or in any strength sport?
Yeah, I could talk about this a long time. I feel like I got really lucky with volleyball. Volleyball is this team sport. But if you're on the court, there's only 6 people with you. You have kind of a responsibility in a certain section of the court, and you have a certain responsibility that other team members are relying on you to do. There's a lot of communication that's happening on the court. There's a lot of kind of small technical skills that you need to work on very hard to master. And the more effort you put into mastery, the better you're going to be, both as an individual and as a team. And those kind of lessons about, more work equals more reward, and teamwork is important, and communication is important. Those kind of things have transcended sport for sure for me, and I've learned to be a better powerlifter as a result.
And do you think the idea of nucleus overload training or nuclei training comes in the play as well when it comes to hypertrophy or strength sports?
You mean myonuclear training, where you're trying to change exercises to grow muscles? Is that it?
No, nucleus overload training. For example, you train the same muscle or the same movement for a long period of time.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean, just so I know what I'm talking about.
For example, if a person is a track athlete or a sprinter, for a long period of time, for a couple of years, he has done short sprints and gotten faster in that range of motion or in that movement, and that might have some carryover when it comes to powerlifting or in a bodybuilding.
Sure, yeah, that's kind of a way of saying specificity. So something about what you were doing carries over into a new sport. For sure, I mean, taking a look at the energy systems of volleyball, it's explosive. No round lasts longer than a minute, when the ball starts in play, and it's very explosive. So there may absolutely be some carryover. We might expect to see football players who have a similar kind of explosive short amount of training. Here I'm talking about American football, might see that carry over to powerlifting as well. And so, you see these people who have backgrounds in gymnastics, for instance, end up becoming really good powerlifters as well, very explosive. Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that.
And I think majority of the athletes in powerlifting in US could be starting their powerlifting training for to increase their power or explosive strength in their American football thing. And if they don't get lucky in that, they might switch over to powerlifting.
Yeah, you might see that for sure. Same thing with rugby and many other sports. So a lot of great powerlifters have come here from other sports. Ray Williams used to be a football player, and I think a lot of athletes have their background in another sport.
So talking about Ray Williams, one thing just clicked in my mind. Is there any
Vedant, your net is lagging.
I think you're back. No, not yet.
Yeah, it's net of lagging, I guess. There's an issue in it.
Aniket, I think you should continue with this.
Okay. What
Okay, I
was your
think you're
question
good now.
exactly?
Net is lagging.
Hello.
We can talk about peaking.
Yeah. So Bryce, what's your take on peaking?
I think we should just discard that question and start with the peaking side of things.
Okay. Yeah, peaking is the process of shedding some fatigue and increasing performance on a specific day. So you have been training for a while, you're getting stronger, all that is great. All that peaking means is this process of manipulating these two curves over time. So one is, three curves, I guess. Fitness is one of them. Fatigue is one of them. So this is sometimes called the fitness fatigue model. As fatigue drops off, fitness starts to rise. And then we have performance as well, which is related to fitness, but slightly different. So to peak an athlete, all we do is we drop off a little bit of fatigue by decreasing the amount of work they're doing, either sets or maybe a little bit of intensity or frequency or something like that. And this process can take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks usually. And we end up with a boost in performance that's higher than we would have had otherwise. So I think a lot of the thoughts on peaking have mellowed out over the last 5 years or something. People used to think like, oh, I'm getting 15% out of my peak. But really, it may be closer to 3 to 5% for most athletes. So peaking can do something, but I don't think that you should take your training and add 15% and base your attempt selection and competition around that.
Yeah. So don't you think what do you say? Fatigue is just a masking for your fitness?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this relationship between fatigue and fitness that's complicated because a lot of intermediate to advanced athletes need to train in a state of fatigue. So it's not like we can ever fully get rid of fatigue, and so almost all the time fatigue is masking fitness. And the other side of that same coin is if we have an athlete ever get down to, let's say, 10% fatigue, if you could make a scale of 1 to 100%. That might actually decrease their performance because they're so used to training in a state of slight fatigue that being completely fresh actually makes them perform worse. They're not as practiced with their skill. They forgot how to squat. They forgot what it feels like to have this bar on their back. So this fitness fatigue relationship is important, but it's not like going down to zero fatigue is what we want most. So we want to decrease fatigue. We want them to feel fresh, but not so fresh that they get rid of their ability to make progress.
Okay.
I think
So
getting out of peak is very difficult in India because you are informed about the meets like a week or two before.
Yeah, that's insane. I can't imagine. Well, actually, you almost have to change your training style a lot in order to be able to get ready for something like that.
Yeah,
yeah, it's very
and it's
difficult.
pretty interesting as well because if you see the old timers powerlifters, you will see them training like close to their max, always in the training, and singles and doubles, and the philosophy behind that could be like the meet will be a surprise, like a surprise test for them, so they should be
Yeah,
always ready for it.
I can't imagine trying to get ready for something like that. It'd be like just think of the long-term example of it. It's like the Olympics and saying, well, we don't know when the Olympics is going to be. It'll be anywhere from January to December. You just got to be ready. And I think that would be terrible for athletes. And so I hope there can be some change at the level of the organization or something like that to give more notice to the athletes because that would be hectic to train for.
Actually,
Yeah,
we
we
know the
hope it
dates for
as
the
well.
nationals and stuff, but we don't know the dates for state and district. So basically, we gradually, if we get some gold medal in district, we go to state. If we get a gold medal in the states, we go to nationals.
Hmm.
So we don't know the dates for district and state. We get a confirmation for nationals 3 4 months before.
Wow. Wow. That I feel like well, I hope that India kind of standardizes things and says, look, our nationals is always in early October, our state is always in February or something like that. And so even if you don't have an exact day uh, early, you still know approximately when it is, and then ideally something like 16 weeks before the competition, you know exactly when it's going to be.
Yeah,
It's just
here
two
we
weeks in
know like
India.
2 weeks.
As I've told you, like the thing comes very late to India. Like you guys get noticed like 2 months or 3 months in prior about the meet. We get like 1 week ago. Like bro,
Wow.
tomorrow's the meet. You have to compete. Like how am I supposed to peak in this such time? And then you
Yeah, so
expect
so that would
training.
absolutely change how you train. And so I
Yeah,
understand these old-time bodybuilders training heavy all the time because you have to be ready, I guess.
Yeah, and the psychology is different over here. They used to train equipped, and
Hmm.
equipped you have to train to your like close to 90%. That's what I assume from the training.
Yeah. It just takes a certain amount of weight um, to let you bend the suit
stimulus.
effectively or, get the bar to your chest when you bench press.
Yes,
And I
Vedant.
think the worst thing that could be in terms of the meet announcement is that they prepone the meet. Like if the meet is postponed by 2 or 3 weeks, we can even extend our peak. But in case it is preponed, like we don't even know what to do.
Yeah, that's even worse. It's always easier when you get more weeks, but when you're asked to get ready even sooner, that's even harder. And I think, as coaches, all you can do is get the athletes close to ready and then be able to adjust if possible and adjust not only the training but the expectations too. Like we're just going to take what's there on the day. We're going to make the best decisions we can, and we'll see. So this idea of kind of peaking toward a specific day really only works when you know exactly when you need to be ready and work backwards from there a little bit. Um, Otherwise, you don't know when to drop volume off, and that's a big question mark.
And I think, when coaches like us take a methodical approach towards training, we are, looked down upon mostly by other
Mhm.
powerlifters who are experienced, because, we go by the book mostly, or, just like how the evidence states one should train, and, they just train heavy all the time and still win.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be because the sport is not as clean in India as it's supposed to be,
Hmm.
and that could be the reason as well, because their
Yeah.
recovery is enhanced once they are on PEDs and all.
I think the thing that you probably should concern yourself more with is just making progress for athletes over time, not the
Yeah,
absolute strength of athletes. So if you're working with a new lifter and they're making great progress and they're really enjoying their sport, the wins will come. It's just a matter of time. So and that's when your training methodology will really shine through. And that's kind of how you get better as a coach, is figuring out what works best for your athletes. So um, this kind of idea of like training style versus training style is like, all right, well, let's just tone it down here. And we have different athletes with different genetics and stuff like that. So yeah, conversations about training get very heated sometimes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when I talk about peaking, the last meet that I did, it was like preponed 3 weeks. So the final week I was doing like 5 into 5 or 4 into 5 on deadlifts, and it was pretty heavy, like RP 8 or 8.5.
Yeah.
And I noticed one thing, that the next week I took a taper and did my meet, and I had some good PRs on the deadlift. So do you think it was like a super compensation model?
Yeah, the super compensation model is real. That's basically just the idea of dropping fatigue and increasing fitness and having that effect be slightly higher than your ability to hit an estimated 1 rep max besides. So you get some boost in your performance as a result of doing this peaking process, and that's where that 2 to 3% I talked about before came from. So yeah, super compensation is real. It's just not as big as some people give it credit for.
So do you think it's a good approach to taper down your, volume, like do two into two or 1 into 1 in the last week of the meet prep or in the peak, or just do a bunch of volume and then drop the volume overall, like do a taper?
Yeah, good question. So there are two main ways that the research shows that athletes taper. One is stepwise. So over the course of either days or weeks, there's a step drop in amount of volume toward a competition. And the other is an exponential, which is it stays, and then drops off very quickly toward the competition. Most athletes end up doing an exponential drop. So in the last 7 days or so, you get a very sharp drop in training volume of somewhere around 40% or so. Um, but really, what we need to do is follow athletes' training response. I would say I would say that you can do more harm than good with a taper. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of risk for things to go wrong, and there's not a whole lot of reward for things to go right. So all we want to do is take off a little bit of volume. We don't want to change training dramatically or change exercises or anything like that. But I would say that volume actually starts dropping off much sooner, and here's why. So let's pretend that your heavy day used to be 3 sets of 5. Um, and if you want the athlete to intensify, so you want them to get closer to doing singles, you could have the athlete doing 3 sets of 1 after that. Or let's say, let me back up a little bit. Let's say you wanted to keep volume the same. So 3 sets of 5 is 15 reps. I want the athlete to do singles. I would have to program 15 singles. You know what I mean? All right, I want you to go in the gym and do 15 singles. That's insane, especially when we're talking like RPE 7, 8, 9, 10. That's just not going to happen. And so there's a natural drop off in volume just as a result of the fact that we need the athlete to do fewer reps. So you sometimes see blended approaches where coaches try to keep in some volume. So closer to competition, they do 2 singles, and then they also do 2 sets of 6 after that or something like that to keep in a little bit of extra volume. You certainly see that, but it's not the norm. So volume drops off automatically as a result of the fact that we're using lower reps.
And what's your take on involving singles in the off season or not closer to the meet?
I like singles. I feel like singles keep the athlete focused on what we're trying to do, um, especially light-ish singles, somewhere around 6 to 7 RPE is kind of practice, and that's heavy enough that we can still get a read on how well the athlete is responding to training. We get them to practice good technique. There's a decent weight on the bar, so we're already up in the, let's say, mid 80% to low 90%. And yeah, again, it's the most specific thing we can do. So while I don't think we need singles at 8 every week, some type of low rep work on a semi-regular basis is great. So that's certainly one thing I've changed my mind on over time. It used to be the case that athletes would really only ever touch singles 3 times a week for 3 training tests or competitions, and I've been giving athletes far more low rep work of the, let's say, 5 to 7 RPE range more often.
And talking about the peak, do you like drop the accessory movements for like biceps, arms, calves, and all that during the peak, and keep only the close movements, close accessories?
The last 10 days, I would say I start to drop off some accessories. So I still keep in some of it because that's the amount of volume that it took to get them to where they were at currently. But is it really important to train your biceps 7 days out from a powerlifting competition? Probably not. Is that type of fatigue preventing you from being your best powerlifter? So let's take out a little bit of leg pressing, maybe. Let's take out a little bit of benching work in the same way that we're taking out a little bit from the main lifts too. So we don't have to do things like abs or rear delts or anything like that in the last few days before competition. So certainly there's also a drop off in accessory volume.
And have you, in your experience, like ever experienced a bad peak or an unsuccessful peak?
Yeah, but it's a little bit hard to separate why sometimes. So sometimes it might be meat nerves on the day of the competition. Sometimes it might be a weight cut the athlete had to do. Sometimes it might be travel the athlete had to go through. So there are more reasons than just the taper and the peak for why someone didn't perform well in competition. That said, yeah, I've had times where I dropped off too much volume for an athlete, and they felt like Bambi on the platform, just you know, like they forgot how to lift, and I feel very bad, and I learn from those mistakes and try to be a better coach going forward, and we go on. I've had other cases where I kept in a little bit more volume than I should have, and the athlete did well, but maybe not as well as if we took more volume out. So I'm not perfect. I miss the mark sometimes, and I'll be the first to admit that. And all I can do is kind of try to learn and get better from meet to meet for athletes.
Bryce, I had a question for you over here.
Yeah.
So, how do you think like taper should work for different athletes?
Tapers are very similar across athletes. It's just a drop off in volume and either keeping or reducing a little bit of intensity. So you get done with your heaviest lifting somewhere between 7 to 10 days out, and kind of once you finish that, I'm still here, by the way. My camera just shut off.
No,
It just overheated, and it's a problem I've got to go get fixed.
it's
Getting
a
back to the point.
Logitech.
Yeah, the process of tapering is really similar. The only difference is when you start the taper and how steep the taper is. And this kind of depends on the athlete you're working with. So I would say the first time you work with an athlete, just go middle of the road and just kind of see how that works. And if you find out that the athlete needed a little bit more taper next time, you can try tapering a little bit sooner. And you can have them do their heavier lifting a little further out from competition. So maybe their last deadlift, instead of being 7 days out from competition, is 10 days out. Or maybe instead of 10 days, it's 14 days out. So you kind of manipulate factors like that to ultimately get up with the best performance. So to give you a real case for myself, we have switched from doing my heavy deadlift at 10 days out to doing it 2 weeks out. So now my heaviest work is 2 weeks out. And then at 7 days out, so instead of 14 days out, instead of 7 days out, I'll just do a single at like 7 RPE instead of like 9 RPE. And that has my deadlift feeling better in competition. So I'm just carrying less fatigue. I'm still practiced. I'm able to lift my best. And that kind of stuff is really just learned through trial and error. I wish there was a shortcut to say, looking at these factors, we know exactly how you're going to taper. But the real reality is there's a lot of trial and error, and you just need to pay attention, ask questions, and learn from mistakes.
Yeah. So what do you think about the mistake people make in the competitions, like eating different kinds of food on the competition day,
On dog
trying
day
different?
jitters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No curry on the platform. We
No
we learned
career.
that one.
You're talking to Indians, man.
Yeah, I know. Really, when it comes to competition, I want athletes to change as little as possible. So no new foods, no new supplements. Don't sleep any less than you usually do. Don't try any crazy weight loss techniques, or don't sniff ammonia in competition if you don't ever sniff it in training. So the least we can change from training to competition, the more predictable an athlete's performance is going to be. So that I think drives a lot of what I'm trying to get at with athletes is how can we get your most predictable performance out? So keep foods as kind of neatly digestible as possible. Make sure the athlete has seen the competition venue or knows what to expect. Kind of the least things that surprise you, the better off you'll be.
So, what is the weirdest post weigh-in recom food items that you have seen people consume
Oh
right
yeah.
after weigh-in?
Yeah, no question on that. I have my favorite. There's a local competition that one of my lifters, David Moore, brought some spaghetti, and he put soy sauce on his spaghetti and ate that right after weigh-in. So in his mind, it's high carbs and it's high sodium, which is what you want. But the particular combination is insane. He couldn't even finish it because it was so gross.
And
That's
I
bad.
think it's been pretty funny that I have seen people, just gulp out soy sauce and even the liquid that pickles have, that as well, just for the sodium.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's very common over here. I know of a few athletes who even do that before training sessions.
So, can we talk about attempt selection now?
Yeah, please.
So, what's your take on it? Like, how do you go about assessing an athlete and its, attempt selection?
Right. So the athletes made some progress over their training, from the beginning of their training cycle to where they are now close to a competition. And, you've got the fact that they did a single at 8 and it was, some weight. They did a single at 9 on bench press and that was a different weight. And, you've got some data on maybe a double they did on the deadlift. You can take a look at the estimated 1 rep maxes from those numbers. You can also take a look at what their previous best was and just combine kind of multiple pieces of information. And that'll give you a picture of what you might expect the athlete to be able to do in competition. So there's a few ways we can talk about attempt selection. One is that we want the first attempt to be somewhere around a 7 to 8 RPE, the second attempt to be somewhere around an 8 to 9 RPE, and the third attempt to be somewhere around a 9 to 10 RPE. So in those large ballparks, you can start to figure out what might be best for an athlete. Another way to think about it is the first attempt is somewhere around 91%. The second is somewhere around 96%. And the third is somewhere around 100 to over 100%. We like the athletes to take slightly bigger jumps from first to second attempt or equal jumps from first to second as second to third. So, something like 10 kilos and then 7 kilos or 7 kilos and 7 kilos or something like that. And then outside of that, we just want the opener to be something that is absolutely safe. So something the athlete can, just wake up out of bed, have 15 minutes of warm up and be able to hit, very easily. So there's no risk of missing an opener. They're very confident in it. And it's really just a stepping stone to the second attempt. The second attempt gets us a little bit closer and gives us a good read on how much we should jump And then the third attempt is our best guess at what will absolutely maximize the athlete's performance on that day. So kind of getting close to their absolute highest performance. So that's kind of a broad structure on attempt selection. Outside of that, you might have reasons to go lower than that, or higher than that. Sometimes if you're in a competition situation and you're fighting with another athlete and you need to put an extra 5 kilos on the bar and make it in order to win gold for your country, well, you're going to do that. So the details of the competition itself matter a lot. Or if it's a local competition and it's a new athlete, maybe all I want to do is say, all right, we're putting 5 kilos in your squat, even though you've done 20 kilos more in training. I just want you to experience a good squat in competition. Let's just get some experience in, and we can always save the big lifts for the next meet. So we've got kind of a broad picture, and then how that might change on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, so the first priority should be like going 9 for 9 and building a good total, and then looking if you have any competition, or you should see if there is a placing or not.
Right. So we can talk about the 9 for 9 thing as well. So 9 for 9 is really just making all 9 of your attempts, which it's good, but it's not a goal in itself a lot of times. So 9 for 9 can give the athletes a lot of confidence that they have the mastery to go all the way through. And it breeds a kind of mental toughness that they're able to go into the next competition with added confidence and motivation. But I mean, if you go 9 for 9 and you don't even hit your previous competition bests, then that's not really doing anything. So yes, you went 9 for 9, but you didn't even make any kind of progress. So 9 for 9 is dependent on what weight we put on the bar as far as it being a goal. So it demonstrates competition excellence. It says that the coaching staff knows how to pick attempts for an athlete. But also we really want to maximize athletes' performance and make sure their third attempts are close to failure and progress if we can.
Yeah, and since you talked about the first and second attempt, like 91 to 92% of the, so was it of the estimated 1 rep max or the previous 1 rep max?
Yeah, that's usually off of the new max that we're looking at.
Yeah. So do you have a pre-decided your new 1 rep max or the estimated max?
I try not to. So if we're using estimated 1 rep maxes, you want to be very careful that you're using good data. So if I did a set of 10, the estimated 1 rep max I get from that might be like 100 kilos off, like an insane amount off. So just to give you an example, a long time ago, I did a set of 275 for 10 on deadlift. And the estimated 1 rep max from that is something like 400 kilos. You know what I mean? It's insane. And it would be crazy to program off of that estimated 1 rep max. So we really want to use either triples, doubles, or singles at RPE 8, 9, 10. And look at maybe 5 of those and then take the average of those, and that'll give you a much more reliable number than higher rep sets or something. So we use those, and then also use the numbers the athlete is hitting. So sometimes athletes hit outright PRs in training. So they did a single at 9, and it was a new 1 rep max for them. So that's great, and that kind of should go into your calculations. So we don't have to give the athlete 10 kilo PRs every competition. Sometimes just taking 2.5, the very next 2.5 is all we need.
Yeah. So since we talked about meet, there were 2 questions that I had to ask about the peak, because a meet day is heavily based on how a peak goes as well. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions you solved, you just gave the answer about how you involve RPEs and the singles. So second question that I had was how do you determine the length of peaking block?
So peaking and tapering are kind of 2 different things. We talked about tapering being like a part of the peaking block. Peaking blocks can just be normal blocks. There's a little less science to this, and there's a little bit more practice to this. So your experience may be very different for your athletes, but all we need in peaking blocks is low repetitions and kind of increasing RPEs up to a point where we're getting high performance in training, and we want the athlete to feel kind of more and more ready. So maybe you go from triples, doubles, singles, or maybe you stay with singles and you go 7, 8, 9 RPE over a few weeks. But peaking blocks can be anywhere from the same amount of time as normal, 3 to 6 weeks, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
Bryce, but I had one question. Why do people peak for a long time? Like I have seen people peaking for like 16 weeks. So
I don't know. I don't know what peaking. So in some sense, we're always peaking, right? Because we're always getting ready for some training test or competition. But I
Yeah.
don't know what peaking at 15 weeks out even looks like. And if it does, I think it's more just peaking in word and not in what they're actually doing.
And since I have talked about like how meets are preponed. So let's say in a case you are into peak and your meet gets postponed like a couple of weeks or 2 or 3 weeks. So
Yeah.
how would you like to continue the peak?
Well, you might slow down and you might give the athlete, some singles at a lower RPE for a little while before you go up. So you can kind of take the end of the peak and keep that intact and extend out this beginning part a little bit, if that helps. So it's really just keeping the athlete ready, and I guess you just really need to monitor fatigue very closely. So you don't want the athlete to get so fatigued. So maybe you give them an easy week before you go back to harder weeks, or you say, all right, well, the meet is postponed by 2 weeks, so we're gonna start off much lighter right now, and we're gonna wait 2 weeks, and then we're going into our taper. So there's a lot of it depends answers based on how experienced the athlete is, when you got the notice of the delay, and kind of the athlete's normal response to training as well.
Yeah. So as you said that it might change from athlete to athlete, but for general recommendations, could we see the lighter week a drop in intensity or in volume as well?
You can also drop off volume too. So if you expected a 4-week peak for an athlete, and from previous experience that 4-week peaks work very well for an athlete, you probably want to keep that idea in, even though the meet's in 6 weeks. So you say, oh shit, the meet's in 6 weeks. We're going to make training easy for a few weeks, and we're just going to keep in some of those adaptations to low reps. So we'll have you do 2 easy weeks, but we'll give you some singles at 6 to 7 RPE. Then we'll go into our taper, our peak and taper.
Yeah. And in the case if the meet is preponed like a couple of weeks in.
Yeah, in that case, there's probably a few ways you can go to it. If you guys know the concept of exposures, it's basically the idea that every time you do a lift is an exposure. So this is a concept that Mike Tushir has talked about. So in a typical mesos or a typical microcycle, maybe you have the athlete doing 2 exposures. That's two squats per week. But if you have, and you know that it takes them 8 exposures to get to their highest technique. That's 4 weeks of training, right? Two times 4. If your meet comes up sooner, you might, one way to look at it is you might still need those 8 exposures. You just have to crunch them into a smaller period of time. So instead of squatting every 4 days, you have the athlete squatting every 3 days to try to get that same amount of stimulus in a shorter period of time. Something like that would be one idea. The other idea is just like, oh, well, we're just going to toss out week 3. So we're going to jump from 7 RPE to 9 RPE. And that'll let you get to your end a little bit quicker. So you just take this gradual peak and you just make it a steeper hill instead.
I think this part will be very beneficial to the Indian athletes because I think it's pretty prevalent in Indian programming or how the meets are programmed basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since we talked about meet, can we talk about the two different type of athletes? The people, the athletes who have nerve day jitters and the people or athletes who are very stoked for the PRs.
Sure.
Yeah, so how has your experience been, and what differences in programming do you face when you have to program for these two athletes or make an attempt selection?
So can you describe the 2 athletes again?
So first person is he's very neurotic or he's very nervous for his attempts for his meet or PRs. and the second half person is very stoked, full hyped with ammonia and just banging metal songs, ready to PR.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the first athlete. First athlete is the one who's very nervous in competition. I think I think the one thing that helps more than anything. So the day of competition, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's uncertainty in what the competition is, what will my performance be, how will the day go, you know, what numbers are we going to do? As a coach, the more uncertainty we can remove, the better performance we're going to get from an athlete, the more calm and collected and ready they're going to be. So we remove uncertainty by telling the athlete, this is what the judges are looking for. This is what our first attempt is going to be. These are the two numbers we're going to pick between for our second attempt. This is what happens if we miss an attempt. This is what happens if we make an attempt. This is what we're going for. This is our backup plan. This is what I want you to eat. This is what I want you to sleep. So kind of giving the athlete as much information as possible removes their uncertainty. And you can tell them this is how you're going to feel. You're going to feel a little bit nervous when you go out there, but after your first squat, you're going to calm down and you're going to feel great. So removing uncertainty is a big key for a lot of athletes to get them to have their best performances. And that's just done by talking. So by kind of running them through in advance what they can expect. So that helps out a lot. For the other athlete, what we need is arousal regulation. So if they love metal and headbanging and ammonia and stuff like that, all you want is for them to be able to use that stuff that gets them to their best performance when they need it, and then be able to come back to baseline right afterwards. So, spend the energy, get the great lift by hyping yourself up as high as possible, and then let's get back to baseline so you're ready to do it the next time. So it's really just about kind of bringing them back to baseline and then letting them ramp up after that. So, you can still kind of take care of some of the stuff if you're handling them in person. You can give them their chalk when they need, give them their ammonia, tell them when they're 3 out, when they're 2 out, and that way they can kind of get in their zone and perform as best as possible. And then immediately after the attempt, let's just kind of have them return back to baseline, put on some classical music, or just take the headphones out or whatever before they do it again. So both those are unique cases. And I think in both cases, honestly, removing uncertainty is good for both of those.
Yeah, Bryce,
And
yeah, Vedant.
Aniket, go ahead.
Yeah. So Bryce, do you think smelling salts increase your 1 rep maxes?
By the research, no, but by people's so people tell me that the research is bullshit, and I still feel that my estimated 1 rep maxes are higher when I use ammonia. The research says no, but it was also research done on not experienced powerlifters.
So can you say that's like it's a ritual thing that you feel comfortable doing?
Yeah, it certainly might have some characteristics of being a ritual, of being something that this is just kind of what I do before I go lift, in the same way that I grab the bar first before I go into the bar. It certainly has an effect. If you've ever smelled ammonia, you know that it's not placebo. Like, you smell like your brain is being punched. So it's a crazy feeling, but it's a second question as to whether or not that crazy feeling helps with your performance.
Actually, it tends to be like more focusing when I smell smelling salts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you can't think about anything else other than what you're feeling. It makes you angry. You're kind of in the zone. So I have smelled that and know that effect. And it's just another
But
variable. So it's something you don't want to try for the first time in competition, but you should try it once, just so you know what it's like.
yeah, but I have tried this thing like I right now I'm not using any spelling salts. I just focus, like I just breathe heavily before lifting. So it also gives the same result to me. But I guess ammonia spelling salt has the hype in it, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That's a good use for it.
Yeah, so Bryce, before we move on to the having a tunnel vision on the game day and other psychological side of things, one thing I wanted to ask you was, since we talked about two type of athletes, like one who's very calm listening to Mozart, and on the other hand, a person who's headbanging to, Metallica or Iron Maiden. Do you think the other type of the latter kind of athlete might see some, just because he's very hyped, he might see some decline in his, form, or some form breakdown on the midday just because he's so hyped?
Not really. However, if you have the Mozart athlete listen to the metal music, then you might see some form breakdown. So here we're talking about what's called the individual zone of performance, or zone of functioning, IZOF. And it's the idea that all of us kind of have some sweet spot for what our state of arousal is when we do a specific task. So I've got some certain state, and it's probably different for my squat, my bench, and my deadlift. And you've got some certain state, and maybe it's different. And Owen Hubbard's over here at an 11 when he goes out to the bar every single time. And so everyone's kind of got their sweet spot. And that's truly where we get the best performance. Where we run into problems is when you step out of your zone. So if the metal athlete starts listening to Mozart, we get poor performance. Or if the Mozart athlete starts listening to metal, we get poor performance. It's really just about kind of keeping the athlete in their specific sweet spot.
Yeah, and I think as you mentioned earlier, bringing that habit person back to baseline could work well with this as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So now that have we, flirted with the idea of having vision, having a good mindset in the, on meet day, can you just, talk about the baseline psychological things that an athlete should have on meet day?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say on meet day, there's a few things, but so mental toughness is this kind of catch-all term these days for all these characteristics that we want the athlete to have. So mental toughness has pieces of coping strategies. It has pieces of kind of being able to bounce back from setbacks, being able to stay focused on your task, kind of keeping technique under pressure. All of these things fold into this idea of mental toughness. So if there's anything we want for athletes, it kind of falls under this mental toughness umbrella. But specifically, I think coping resources and focus on self are probably two of the biggest things. So in competition, you're not worried about other athletes. You're just worried about the things you can control specifically. And when things go wrong, you're able to correct back to baseline very quickly. I think that's really important too. So you miss an attempt, you miss a first attempt because you were high on your squat. Instead of crying about it and letting it kind of affect the next 3 attempts, you snap out of it, you take a deep breath, you control yourself, you go out, you repeat the weight, and you crush it. And you go to competition depth, and now you still have another 7 lifts ahead of you, and you can still have a great day. So how long or how short do you let negative things affect you?
Yeah, so I think you can add to this. A couple of years ago, you did a podcast or a talk with Mike Tushier on stoicism.
Yeah.
So it has a similar thinking or philosophy, similar to what you just said.
Yeah, it does. It's about just being able to control only the things you can control and not worrying about the things that you can't. So, if someone else is over there lifting 300 kilos, I can't do anything about that unless I want to go over and kick them in the knees. So it's really just kind of about focusing on yourself and your own efforts. And that's freeing too, because it prevents a lot of the worry that you might have about whatever else is going on around you.
And how can we transition that off the platform as well? Like people, in the off season or in the peaking or in the training as well, people have outside sources of stress, and how can they, manage this stress and create a tunnel vision?
There's a lot of things you can do. Kind of coping resources is one. So coping resources is a term that kind of catches all these things like deep breathing, visualization, compartmentalizing. So for athletes who are stressed a lot, they've got a stressful job, maybe you just create this boundary that when you step in the gym, you're just focusing on what's going on in the gym and you forget whatever else is going on in your life. You just kind of focus on the zone. You just pick that stuff up later on. It's hard to do that sometimes. If your girlfriend just broke up with you, Have fun trying not to think about that while you're training. Sometimes we just can't get things out of our mind. But certainly being able to focus on what you're trying to do at any one given time. And a lot of this is trial and error. It's getting better by overcoming adversity over time. So small bits of adversity and getting better at overcoming those.
Yeah. I think as Indians, we should not be talking about having a girlfriend, but on the other hand, we should talk about how visualization can be, incorporated in your, training and daily life as well.
Sure. Yeah. So you're under the squat bar and you're getting ready to lift, and you think about maybe the best time you ever squatted. Think about how that felt, what your body was doing as you were moving. How powerful did you feel? How did the bar feel on your back? Were your friends cheering for you? Were you listening to your favorite song? You just kind of want to bring yourself back to that moment and make that experience as real as possible for you. And that kind of visualization can help make you a better lifter.
Yeah. And as you just said about squat, I was just flushed with nostalgia, and I just remember how I squatted 172, which is not good, which is not great, but still how I grinded it up doing a good morning. And when I reached the top, I just left the bar.
I bet that felt really good for you, and those memories kind of help make you a better lifter in the long term too. You can lean on those when things are hard. You can say this is why I do all this, because of that feeling right there.
Yeah, and I think it gets you very aesthetic as you attempt PRs, and it's a very happy moment for you as a powerlifter. Like, you attempt PRs on the platform, that's the most important thing for you.
Mhm.
Right, right.
And
Bryce,
I think, yeah, just one thing, Aniket.
I yeah.
So I think I heard this thing. I don't know if on Mark Well's podcast or somewhere. Like, the person was, or Dave Tate's podcast. I don't remember, but the person was saying, like, if you are given with a squat attempt, which is a PR or something, you should be performing it, uh, thinking the way that a gun is hold on to your child's head. Do you agree with that, or do you think a person should, just forget about it and focus on lifting?
Ah, man, that's kind of extreme. If I was lifting like a gun was being held to my imaginary child's head, I don't have a child, but I can imagine maybe what that was like. I'd be terrified every time I went to squat, and I don't know if
Yeah.
that's the best way to lift. So that might work for some people, but saying this is how everyone should lift is probably too extreme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Aniket, go ahead.
Yeah, Bryce. So I have this question, like when I perform a PR, but I'm not very happy with that. What to do about that then? Like I want to get more out of it.
Sorry, more what?
Like when I do my PRs, I'm like I can do much better. So is it a good thing to have in like the mental form, or should we be happy with the PRs we have?
I think anytime you PR, you should be happy with it. It's okay to want more. Um, it's okay to not be ever fully satisfied, but you have to stop and recognize your success as you're going through it. Because if you're always looking at the next PR and not looking at the current PR, then you miss a lot of what powerlifting is about. It's about the moment and celebrating. It's not about, this number that you need to hit at some point. So, um, what I'm saying is there's this balance in between being hungry for the next lift for a specific number, but you have to recognize your success along the way.
Yeah. And Bryce, what you just heard was coming from the strongest junior of India.
Yeah. So it's okay. It's okay to have, and I mean, I think this is the case for all athletes, to kind of just compare yourself to high level athletes and say, what I'm doing isn't good enough. Look at this lifter over here. Look at the number they hit. I go through that all the time, man. So what we're talking about is external frames of reference versus internal frames of reference. So the internal frame of reference says, I've never squatted this weight before, ever. That's amazing. I'm happy with that. The external reference says, well, I know I just squatted, 260, but this guy over here is squatting 300. So how can I feel good about my 260 when I'm not even close to this other guy? And you can see how you can be happy in one case and sad in the other. So you have to balance these two, and that's what competitiveness is all about.
Yeah. So I had this issue, like I don't know if I win, it's like no feeling is there. I don't know
Hmm.
why. I don't feel anything about
Are
winning.
you are
Because
you
you
beating
might
other athletes by like
competition.
50 kilos or more?
More than that, I guess.
Okay. So you're not really, so part of
Competitive.
motivation,
Yeah.
there's three pieces of motivation if we're looking at self-determination theory. One piece is competence. Another piece is autonomy. The autonomy piece is feeling like you have control over your decisions, and the other piece is relatedness. So being able to share these achievements with friends and family, and kind of engaging your sport. For you, the competence piece is very low right now. So you're making progress, but there's no challenge. At the level of competition. You don't have to. What's the difference in between 2.5 kilos if you're ahead by more than 50 kilos from other athletes? There's no challenge. So I think you need to create challenge for yourself in other ways, by giving yourself a specific total to hit rather than beating other competitors, and bringing the focus back to yourself and saying, look, I know I'm 50 kilos ahead of other athletes, but how much am I ahead of my previous total? And that's the frame that you really need to try to focus on.
Yeah, basically hitting PR like on the platform.
Yeah, exactly. So I hate to cut this short, by the way, but I will have to finish this podcast pretty soon.
No issue, Bryce.
Okay.
Yeah. So as
Siddhant,
we
do you
talk,
have it?
yeah, as we
Yeah.
talked about practicing good, just mental drills. Is there anything you think we could add to our daily routine, like meditation or something, or practicing visualization that would benefit us in the long run?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. I'd say a really easy one you can do is after you finish every workout, write down 3 things that you either did well or that you're grateful for. So it can be simple as I really like my technique on bench press, or I really like I noticed that I took shorter rest times on my deadlift because I was more focused today, or whatever it is. It can be anything. So that kind of gratitude connects you with your training and also helps in the long run. Um, what other things? Take notes about your training for sure, about your technique, about your mindset. Just take notes about how things felt. Taking notes on a regular basis gives you something to look back on, and it makes you more connected to your training process, and it helps you learn from your mistakes as well. And probably that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and as you said that sometimes comparing ourselves with bigger athletes could be a good motivation to perform better. But I think it could be the reverse case for people who are just starting out and they see people hitting PRs and PRs on the Instagram and the social media platforms.
Yeah, so actually, I think it does more harm than good to compare yourself to other people. So there's probably fewer people who look at someone else lifting a certain weight and they feel very motivated about that. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do that. More people compare themselves. So it's called upward comparison when you're comparing yourself to someone better than you. So most people feel better about themselves when they engage in downward comparison, when they feel that they're comparing themselves to someone weaker than them. You feel better about yourself, right? So um, you have to be careful about comparing yourself to other people. And remember that you control exactly what you see on social media. So you can unfollow or follow whoever you want. No one's forcing you to follow, the top people in the IPF or anything like that. So decide for yourself if it is a good thing for you or a bad thing for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I
So
think the only
I have
comparison one should do is like how stronger or what their total was yesterday or like in the last meet and what it is now. The only comparison should be of the previous you.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Aniket, you had to add something.
nothing. That was it, bro.
So just one last thing, Bryce. After that, we will end this podcast. So do you see what are the common mistakes that you see coaches do, and what are some tips for newly formed coaches trying to make their athletes stronger?
Good question. So I would say So a few mistakes that new coaches make. One is that they program in a way that would make them strong rather than a way that would make the athlete strong. So you have to remember to think always about the athlete you're working with and not what would work for you specifically. So put yourself in the shoes of your athlete, think about them, and not think about what would make you strong. So for me, I respond well to kind of like 2.5% lower intensity and like maybe one set less per exercise than normal. And I have to kind of think, look, I'm not this athlete. I need to program them what they need, not what I need specifically. So put yourself in the shoes of the athlete. I would make sure to always ask questions and ask the athlete what they think instead of kind of imposing everything on the athlete. So, you know, this kind of athlete-centric approach is what I'm talking about here. So ask the athlete, what are your favorite exercises? What have worked well for you? What are you feeling in the gym? What feels easy for you? What feels hard for you? So the more information you get from the athlete, that lets you make better decisions for yourself too. And then always continue learning. So never feel like you have enough information, that you answered all the questions. There's always more to learn. There's always more perspectives to get. So continue learning forever.
Yeah, I think that was a good end to our podcast. So, Bryce, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking to us.
Guys, it was my pleasure. Thank you. You guys asked some great questions.
Thank you. We're just trying to learn and educate others and get India stronger.
Good.
That's a
Well, that's a good thing. India needs it.
yeah. So, guys, that's the end of our podcast. Like, follow, and subscribe. You can also follow us on Spotify and our Instagram handles. You can follow Bryce as well, but I'm pretty sure everyone knows who Bryce Lewis is. So हम मिलते हैं next week में एक नए guest के साथ. Till then, be at home and be safe and सदा strong रहो. Peace.
Peace out.
Peace.